Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action Podcast, back with another article review. In today's episode, I want to review a new article that's going to be added to my list, which I think is up to 22 of studies that have made direct comparison between linear prescriptive coaching and nonlinear ecological approach, for example, constraints-led approach. Right. So looking at this study is going to add an interesting twist in that it's going to look at whether the potential that there's different athletes might benefit differently with these two methods. So I'll talk about that a bit more. So the study I'm looking at today is this one, recently published in Frontiers of Psychology. You can have a look. It's open access, obviously. So just to remind you, obviously most people listening will know what we mean by linear and nonlinear pedagogy, but just to remind you, by linear pedagogy, we mean taking a reductionistic, decomposed, repetitive part task practice approach to skill. A simple way to sum it up is the idea of fundamentals first, right? I need to teach you to dribble before you can play soccer, to shoot with no opponent in your face before you can play basketball, skate before you can play hockey, all these different things, right? We're going to take the skill out of the game, right? Separate perception and action, have you repeat it over and over and over until you get the technique down, and then we'll put it back in the game, right? That's the basic idea. People that deny that this still exists, I think you're walking around the world with your eyes closed. This is everywhere still. This is the dominant way people coach, I see. Where we teach you how to catch a football, put your hands like this before we run a play, okay? What are the limitations of this, right? Obviously, we're teaching you one idealized movement pattern when we know that being skillful requires adaptability. It requires you to find multiple movement patterns to adapt to the constraints, okay? Second, we're separating perception and action, right? So when you do the linear approach, you learn how to do it, but you don't learn when to do it, right? So you learn how to pass the soccer ball, but when do you pass it? How big a gap? When the person is running? You don't look because it's not linked to any information that you're going to have in the game. You don't learn that, right? So you essentially have to teach it twice. And most importantly, how you do something depends on the information, right? When you do it. So separating them is going to lead to this kind of artificial version of the skill that you have to teach again later on. And finally, when you use a linear approach, you have the instructor telling the athlete what to do. This is how you do it, which greatly eliminates reduces autonomy, self-regulation, right? All those good things, motivation when you get athlete involved and you allow them to find their own movement solutions. Okay, so that's linear pedagogy. Nonlinear pedagogy is, of course, the main coaching method G. Chow and have developed that underlies ecological dynamics, right? It's this wraps up the constraints-led approach within this, right? It's the basic idea. We're going to emphasize the interaction between the athlete, the task, and the environment. We're going to keep those together, right? We're going to let the athlete self-organize. As a coach, we're going to manipulate the practice constraints, where we're going to give the athlete different problems to solve instead of giving them the solution, where we're going to let them adapt and learn how to become a problem solver. We're going to keep, key components. We're going to keep perception action coupled. So we're going to learn how to use the information, how to perform the skill at the same time as picking up the information they use to drive it. We're going to focus on functional variability of movement patterns, right? Not just repeating one over and over, not building up a store of one in your head that you can press with an Xbox controller when you need it, right? We're going to learn how for you to find different variations of movement patterns that'll be effective for different constraints. And then we're going to get you kind of a awareness of the solution space and how to find a solution when you need it, right? So that's the basic idea. As I said, I've talked about these lots of times, so hopefully it's not. So as I said, this is not linear pedagogy is still the dominant approach in most sports. Everything I see it is. The people that do accept the idea that there's benefits to nonlinear pedagogy, there's two things they want to hang on to. One is we need to do linear pedagogy first, right? The fundamentals first. We need to take the skill of dribbling out of soccer, teach you it through proper way to do it first. Then we'll do small-sided games, whatever, right? Okay. There's also this view that, so there's that view. There's also this view I see from the It Depends crowd that maybe Some athletes need linear pedagogy while others will be fine with nonlinear. Some athletes need you to do strict technique, dribble around cones, while other ones will be fine handling small-sided games. Okay. So this is the kind, so maybe athletes with more, that are more variable as they start, younger, are less adaptable, which is what this paper is going to address, will need linear pedagogy first before they move into nonlinear pedagogy conditions. Right? So if you've read my recent book, this is the kind of it depends that I don't agree with at all, right? The kind of it depends that you need less different constraints, more or less variability, different methodologies for different athletes is inherent in the constraints-led approach in nonlinear pedagogy. So I 100% agree with that. What I don't agree with is that you switch theories, right? For some, so depending on the athlete. So some athletes, you do a linear approach where you believe that skill is stored mental representation. The other ones, you switch to a nonlinear approach and you say it's adaptability and functional variability. Those don't go together, right? So I don't believe in that kind of it depends. But okay, so but this study really wanted to address this question in more detail, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to compare a linear pedagogy approach and a nonlinear pedagogic approach for training skilled performance. You'll see the term MSP, that means motor skilled performance in soccer or football, okay? And what they're going to do is look at a moderating variable. So a moderating variable is a variable that kind of sits in between an independent variable and a dependent variable and moderates the strength, right? So, you know, for example, in psychology, a high level of stress leads to depression, okay? But there's a moderating variability of your support, your socioeconomic status, right? How much money you have, how much family support you have. When you have a high level of support, the same amount of stress is going to less likely lead to clinical depression. When you have a low level of income, low level of support, the same amount of stress is more likely. So socioeconomic stress is a moderating variable that can turn up or down the relationship between independent variable stress and the dependent variable level of depression. So a moderating variable is something that sits in between and adjusts the strength of two variables. Right, so the moderating variable they're going to look at in this study is a measure of adaptability. We'll talk about that as we get it. So what they're proposing based on these previous research, which I've documented on my page, go to my webpage resources. There's nonlinear pedagogy is going to be more effective for training soccer, right? There's lots of research showing that it's better than prescriptive coaching in a lot of different sports. Nonlinear pedagogy, one of the interesting things they're going to do in the study is have a bit longer of a retention interval than they normally do. So they're going to train people, measure a post-test, and then they're going to do a month later, right? And they're going to come back and measure and to see how well the skills are retained. They're proposing that it's going to be better retained for nonlinear pedagogy because you're not storing a particular memory representation like a motor program or something, right? The third hypothesis is that this individual adaptability variable they're going to measure is going to moderate the strength of the relationship between the improvement you get from nonlinear pedagogy. It's going to moderate that. Okay, so it's going to determine. So people with high adaptability are going to benefit more from nonlinear pedagogy. People with low adaptability are going to benefit less. And the fourth hypothesis is that there's also going to be individual adaptability is going to moderate the strength relationship between linear pedagogy and improve pre to post test improvement. This is a really important one. This is the it depends proposal, right? The idea that people with low adaptability might benefit more from linear pedagogy than people with high adaptability. That would support that it depends argument that I was discussing before. Okay. So let's get to the method. So in this study, they had 40 participants that had never played soccer before that were randomly assigned to two groups, 20 in a linear pedagogy group and 20 in a nonlinear pedagogy group. This total study lasted 14 weeks, right? So there were 10 weeks of training. So they had pre-test, training for 9 weeks, and then a post-test, right? And the training will focus on different skills, passing, dribbling, shooting, one-on-one, all these different skills of soccer. They then waited 4 weeks, a month, and did a retention test, okay? So which is, as I said, is longer than what often we do in these type of studies, longer than I usually do, I'll admit. Still not hugely long, but it's better, okay? So that's the basic design of the study. The pre and post test measures. So what they did in the pre-test is that people play 5-on-5 soccer matches against each other. 40 minutes match divided into 2 halves. What they're doing is what they're going to measure in these matches is passing success rate. So the ratio of the number of passes you make to the number that get to the person you're passing to. And they had two independent raters who were very experienced in soccer. One was a coach, one was a technical director. Watch the matches and score these for each player. Okay, well, they had watch the video recordings of it so they could slow it down. These people were not involved in the training at all. They didn't know which group people were in. So they did proper blinding, all the good stuff. Well-designed study. The adaptability they measured, right? So in the pretest, what they're going to do is they're analyzing the passing people make, right? They're going to measure essentially the same thing they were measuring before, the passing success rate. But what they're going to do is they're going to take out all passes that were made with a dominant inside edge of the foot, right? So they're taking away the most common, maybe ideal movement solution, right? So they're going to include everything: chip passes, heel passes, chest passes. Anything else is going to be included in this measure. So the specific measure was they're going to take the number of passes you made, right? So their pass rate, number of passes you made, excluding the dominant foot pass, right? And they're going to divide that by the total number of passes, right? So this is a measure they call variational pass rate. Then they're going to calculate the variational success rate, which is the number of successful variations, right? Divided by the total number of passes, right? So their adaptability score is going to be how often you pass by times the success rate, excluding the most dominant solution, right? So it's basically how many different ways can you successfully pass other than the most common solution, right? So I think it's a good measure. The kind of confusing thing about this study is using this as a moderated variable is a little weird because you expect the training to change this, right? In nonlinear pedagogy, your adaptability score should go up, right, during training, right? That's part of what we're teaching you to do. Come up with other variable movements, functional movement solutions, rather than learn the one. So I'm very hesitant to look at that adaptability score in the pretest and the retention. That's kind of confusing to me. But looking at it in the pretest where people started and seeing how it relates to how much they benefited from the different training, that kind of makes sense to me. Okay. All right, so the training interventions, right? So the training interventions, linear pedagogy, nonlinear pedagogy. Linear pedagogy is coach directed. Going through repetitive practice, repeating different drills for shooting in practice. All players doing learn the same technique. Coach provide corrective feedback, all the good stuff. Nonlinear pedagogy was player-centered, more flexible, more adaptable training, more diverse training, manipulating constraints, so small-sided games, number of players, size, and all that good stuff, right? So very similar to what has been done in the past. Okay, let's look at the results. So first of all, this is the passing success rate. So the passing success rate was roughly equal in the pretest, right? After the post-test, after the 9 weeks of training, consistent with all the other research and all the other sports, the passing success rate was significantly higher for the nonlinear pedagogy group as compared to the nonlinear pedagogy group, right? It's not that the linear pedagogy group didn't get better and didn't learn. It's that the nonlinear pedagogy was more effective use of practice time. They got better. They had a greater improvement, right? So consistent with previous research that supports their first hypothesis, nonlinear pedagogy is better than linear pedagogy. They also found that linear pedagogy had a greater, there was significant difference at the 4-week retention interval. Particularly, linear pedagogy had a much greater decrease in passing success rate between post-test and retention, whereas nonlinear pedagogy stayed roughly the same. So they didn't have any loss of this ability. Okay, so that's kind of the main overall performance effect. Okay, the next thing they did was look at the adaptability. Okay, so they looked at the adaptability. So remember, what we're going to do is measure this: how many different passes ways you can pass successfully, without using the dominant inside foot pass. And then we're going to see how that relates to how much you as an individual improve from pre to post this is the only one I'm going to focus on, in the two groups, right? So what they found was adaptability scores significantly moderated the relationship between the pre and post session for the nonlinear pedagogy. So I'll show you the effect in a second, but basically people that started with a higher adaptability score benefited more, improved more from pre to post than those in the those with a lower variability score. Okay, so that's one finding. The second one is the single most important finding of this whole study for me. So sorry, that should say the linear pedagogy. For the linear pedagogy approach, adaptability did not significantly moderate the relationship during the post retention. So it was not the case that people started with low variability, so low ability to make different types of passes successfully, benefited more from a linear pedagogy approach than those with a high, right? So that variable had no effect, right? So to me, that kind of throws water on the "it depends" argument, right? It does not support that at all, right? Here's the passing success rate, right? So this is, I think, looking pre-test to post-test is the amount of change, right? So people with high adaptability definitely benefited more, right? It was not the case, obviously, that people with a low adaptability didn't benefit at all. They did benefit, right? Just a little bit less, okay? So this was a significant difference. As I mentioned, that's just for the nonlinear pedagogy condition. In the linear pedagogy condition, there is no such relationship. Okay, so their results, so they conclude, the results indicate that nonlinear pedagogy was better, improving and maintaining soccer performance as compared to linear pedagogy, consistent with as I said, my ongoing list of studies that support this. There was not a decay in the linear pedagogy. Nonlinear pedagogy does not seem to decay as fast as linear pedagogy. If you think of schema theory and Schmidt's motor program, the idea he proposed that without the stimulus to keep it kind of going, it's going to decay, and that's kind of consistent with what they found. So not only was nonlinear pedagogy improved performance more, it was retained better, which of course is what you want to see. Adaptability emerged as a pivotal moderating variable on nonlinear pedagogy, how effective the training was. It strongly predicted this relationship. And what this suggests to me, right? So they suggest that people that start with a more adaptability are going to benefit more from nonlinear pedagogy's more exploratory approach, emphasizes that rewards being able to do variability in decision making. Less adaptability may struggle, right? They may benefit from a more structured step-by-step approach. To me, okay, again, this is my athletes with higher adaptability should provide additional support and feedback and gradually do a nonlinear approach, okay? So for me, right, my thoughts, to me, this does not support the idea that for some athletes you need to do linear pedagogy and some athletes you need to do nonlinear pedagogy. If that was true, then you would have got a moderating relationship in both groups, right? You would have found that some athletes with low variability would have benefited more from linear pedagogy, which was not found, right? Low adaptability people did not benefit more from linear pedagogy. Low adaptability people benefited less from nonlinear pedagogy, okay? To me, the authors seem to be kind of waffling. They suggest that some may benefit from starting with a linear pedagogy approach. I don't agree. I think this study supports the idea that you need to do nonlinear pedagogy different for different people, right? As we've always talked about, we need the amount of variability in conditions, the type of constraints. So we need to have appropriate level of variability and appropriate level of challenge based on the athlete, right? So we don't want to have too difficult constraints, So, a nonlinear pedagogy approach to learning basketball is having someone come and try to block your shot from different angles when you're learning to shoot, right? For someone that's got starts with a high level of adaptability, they can shoot in a lot of different ways, right? Maybe you want to start with a constraint where someone has something big in their face, something's right up in your face. For someone that doesn't have that, we still want to have the coupled nonlinear approach variable, have them come up with a variability solution, but maybe make it constrain the defender. They can only get so close, right? So they have it's a little bit easier, right? So we constrain the level of challenge to be appropriate using the rule I always talk about, constraining the level of variability, the number of different options you have, right? So to me, it still supports the idea that we need to use that nonlinear pedagogy is going to be most effective for everyone. We just need to scale it and adapt it for individual learners, depending on their measure, something like this, the measure of adaptability. In my opinion, it does not support the idea that we need to start some people in a linear, decomposed approach, right? Again, and I refer you, I'm going to have an interview coming soon with Tom Perry, one of the authors. There's a recent study, a paper he published looking at unopposed versus opposed practice, right? So unopposed practice is a common methodology learned used in linear pedagogy. Unopposed does not have to be used in a linear completely. It can be used in a way that's consistent with ecological dynamics, varying constraints, making things unpredictable, a high level of challenge, not repeating this, not repetition without repetition, right? So it's not, doesn't mean, so maybe some people will benefit from starting with unopposed, but not using it in a linear prescriptive manner. Okay, so if that makes sense. That doesn't, we're going to talk about more of that in the coming weeks. We'll have a So overall, I think this is a really interesting study. I like that someone's getting into the individual differences. That's a really great addition to this literature. As I said, if you go to my webpage, perceptionaction.com/resources, there's a link that says comparative studies. I have a running list of all the studies that have made direct comparisons between linear prescriptive methods and some method consistent with the ecological dynamics approach. And this is going to be added to it as well, because I think it's a good study. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.